and welcome to the BPD Bunch Brunch, where we get together with our favorite brunchy beverages to catch up, play games, and talk about all things BPD. I'm your host, Zanny, and today I'm here with Jess, Sophie, Madhurima, Lore, and André. Where in the world are you coming from, and what's your brunchy beverage for today?
I'm originally from Ciudad de Mexico, but I am currently in California, and my little brunchy drinky is going to be a spicy orange tea.
Ooh. I'm coming from Toronto in Canada, and I'm currently drinking some green tea.
I'm in Southampton in the UK, which is on the south coast, and I'm currently drinking some lime cordial to keep my vibes fresh.
Nice.
I'm coming from Kolkata, India, and my brunchy beverage is just water because it's almost midnight here and I don't want to have caffeine at this late in the night. So
yeah, we are being brunch loosely.
I'm in London in the UK and my brunchy beverage is a blackcurrant cordial. Why are we both drinking cordial, Andre? It's cold.
It's cold.
it's a London thing.
We're the outliers.
So, in today's episode, we're talking about BPD and intergenerational trauma. So, intergenerational trauma is when trauma is passed down generation to generation. And people who've experienced trauma, often, especially if it goes unprocessed, you can have a lot of difficulties creating healthy emotional attachments. You can use a lot of negative coping mechanisms to cope with that trauma. And all that stuff really has an impact on the next generation, right? It has an impact on your children and how your children grow up. It impacts us in all sorts of ways, psychologically, biologically, emotionally. People might end up replicating traumatic experiences. It's not just your one instance of traumatic experiencing that you're going through. You're experiencing it, yes, on an individual level, but also across a family level. And oftentimes we're experiencing it on a community level as well, especially when it's rooted in more historical traumas. By that, I just mean traumas that are experienced across a collective level, across a society, across a population. Things like the legacies of slavery, legacies of colonization, war, things like that. And when you experience intergenerational trauma and you have BPD, it really amplifies your experience of BPD symptoms. You're not just recovering from your own experiences, you're also navigating all of the trauma of your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors, your, wherever you're coming from, what your roots are. And that's a lot of different layers to be healing and navigating.
My understanding of generational trauma didn't actually come about until I became a parent. Because what I realized was when I was living as a child growing up and things that were happening, I normalized that behavior. I thought, well, this is how life is for everyone. And it was when I then became a dad who wasn't present in his child's life, when I thought, oh my God, I've turned into the one thing that I swore that I would never be.
For me, I think about my trauma in two ways. I kind of think of my dad's side of the family that I'm not so close with and my mom's side of the family. My father grew up in Cuba at a time where there was a lot of political unrest. He also grew up in a family where there was a lot of violence. He was also abandoned by his father. And then he's ended up, abandoning several children, including me when I was really young. And now I see some of my current siblings having difficulties with their children. And that's sort of how you see that cycle repeat. On my mom's side of the family, this is the part that raised me, right? My mom's Nicaraguan, my mom, my aunt, my grandmother, they all lived in our house at one time or another. They all had a hand in raising me, and they are all substantial violence survivors. They've all survived physical, emotional, and sexual traumas. My grandfather was very abusive, and that had an impact on the household. At the same time, they were also living through political unrest, civil war, living on rations. And what that meant for me growing up, I found that I really learned to just live in survival mode constantly. I learned hypervigilance from the women around me. I learned about my interpretations of safety and danger from the women around me. I learned to always be on alert. I learned to have a scarcity mindset, and I learned to have a survival mindset at all costs, right? Even though I had a roof over my head, even though I had food to eat, even though I had a safe enough home growing up, my body and my brain were constantly in survival mode. And that's impacted a lot of my behaviors and my relationships today. All those stories that belong to other people, I often felt like a lot of the pain that I was carrying wasn't even all mine. And I don't know if anybody else felt that way.
The thing with my family is a lot of people felt unable or unwilling to communicate about their history. So it's taken me quite a long time to piece together the patchwork and a myriad of different stories, because some of them are powerful. Like Jess was saying, I also found out that one of my older family members had been beaten and left for death, and the house was set alight, and the partner at the time literally died in that fire, which had a massive impact, and nobody had ever talked about things like this. Another family member was murdered. Again, nobody ever talked about it. Even the things that we'd been brought from different countries to come to a new country to live, and the invisibleness that entailed, that made a massive difference.
You've said in other conversations outside this episode, you said you were born in the West Indies and you moved to the UK. I was just wondering, how old were you when you moved to the UK, and do you remember that experience?
I was around 8 years old when I initially came to the UK. That was, for me, in essence, quite a traumatic thing, because we were told as a Commonwealth country, England is paved with gold almost. The streets are, that's how the older people had this vision of the better life. Got here and it was quite dirty and windy and rubbish flying over at Heathrow Airport. And I was like, something's gone drastically wrong here. Then I went to live with one family member, and then one of my parents decided that I had to go and live with them instead. So straight away, I felt like a little bouncing ball passing around. The thing that I noticed about my family dynamic and those around me in other families were, because we came from another place, the pressure on you to perform, get good jobs, get good grades, all these things was much higher than the people, my friends that were already born in the country. One friend member told me, I've paid money to put you into school. If you don't pass this exam, you are failing. So all these pressures were there. And I remember speaking to, it might have been just as I was speaking, that my sister actually found some medals from when I was younger at school, that I can't remember achieving any of these medals because I was under so much pressure to perform that I literally kind of blanked it all out, and I can't remember ever doing those positive and wonderful things.
Laura, I see you nodding.
I needed a second. I was like feeling super overwhelmed with emotion because this topic is super important, and I resonate with both what Jess was saying and Papa as well. And in my case, the hypervigilance, 100% Jess. We came from very strong women in my family, almost no father figures whatsoever for generations, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of abuse. And so therefore you grow up hypervigilant, like you said. Even if you had a roof over your head, you were alert every single day. My grandma would say, don't ever have your hands in your pockets, because if someone attacks you, what are you going to do? Like, you have a second, you know what I mean? It's constantly thinking of, I'm going to get taken, I'm going to get attacked, I might get abused. And even when you're safe, you do not feel safe. For me, it was the opposite of assimilation. When my parents and my family came here, it was the complete opposite. I grew up in a very political home where it's like, you cannot forget where you came from. We're going to teach you all of your history. We're going to teach you your language. But that also was kind of counterproductive in a sense that I became very ethnocentric to a point of racism, to a point where there was a moment where I thought everyone that was just not my race was just not good. And it got to a point where it just fueled a fire, and it was a horrible thing that I had to deal with for a lot of years. One of the things that I dealt with was with my grandma, who was my hero. But even then, I had to realize at a very young age that due to trauma, she would say things like, make sure to marry a white person because you got to better the race. You know, that was something we would hear. Don't go in the sun. Use chamomile in your hair so that it gets lighter. Things that a lot of Latinos grow up hearing. And I had to realize by the time I was 7, 8, 9, my grandma grew up in extreme poverty. She was darker than I am. And she knew that the only way you could get an opportunity in our country with a caste system was to be lighter. So that was the best advice she could have given her children. And it was very difficult for me to understand why I would turn on the TV and watch Mexican novelas and everybody looked like me, but no one looked like my grandmother. No one looked like my other cousins, right? Like there's a crazy level of trauma that comes with like you said, historic events, whether it's war, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's slavery, whether it's getting conquered. And a lot of us, especially living in America, we still have to balance all that, right? Our culture, living in another country, it's a difficult aspect. And I know that probably every single person here has experienced. So I can't wait to hear from Sophie and Madhurima too.
It's interesting that you speak about your grandmother talking about like your skin, like, and all that kind of stuff. I only went natural with my own hair about 2018. I had relaxers and pixie cuts and all these things, and wigs and weaves. Like bleaching is very prevalent in my part of like my parents, where they grew up and where they were born, Gambia. That's a massive thing. Like the hair industry, like with Black people, 70% or something wear wigs and weaves and relax their hair and things like that will chemically destroys your body, all to look more Eurocentric. For my family, we also had no father figures. There's a lot of women in my family, strong women at that, but it meant that there were a lot of cycles being carried on. Certain things as well, like being easily overwhelmed. I think, when there's intergenerational trauma, maybe it wasn't you firsthand that experienced it, but, like that cuts off like your prefrontal cortex and stuff from being able to put logic in front of emotion. So I find a lot of family members, they get very easily overwhelmed. Some people have done fantastic things with it, like my mom, she's really succeeded and stuff. But it's definitely a thing for me. I get easily like overwhelmed. And sometimes I think, do I have ADHD or is it intergenerational trauma? I don't know much about my dad's side of the family, but my mum's side of the family, a lot of like people, father figures have been like abusive and things. And I think that cycle has kind of continued, like to accept certain behaviors that like my generation are trying to change, because we're the ones that are really doing the groundwork to heal intergenerational trauma. And it's a huge undertaking, because you're going against things that are not anything to do with you, you have your own like traumas and you have your own things that are going on, but some of this is, not our stuff. We've been conditioned to behave a certain way, and it's like, how do you begin to heal that,
For me, it expressed itself in a different way than it did for you, because coming from like, a developing country, our country was colonized by the British people for almost 200 years. And when they finally left the country at around 1947, so what they did was they divided our country into current countries of Pakistan and Bangladesh, totally based on a very religious system. Like they became the Muslim majority country and we became a Hindu majority country. My grandparents, like my grandfather and my grandmother, both were residents of East Bengal, which is currently called Bangladesh. So they were uprooted from their land and they had to travel just because they were not a part of the major religion. So it was a very bad situation because so many people were uprooted from their homes and they did not have places to live. And unless you were moderately rich in that time compared to other people, then you basically did not get to have homes, or you did not get to have food in your stomach. For kids who are growing in an environment like that, they never learn to prioritize their mental health, because that becomes a privilege, or that becomes something that you cannot afford to think about because everybody is suffering. You should just be glad that you're alive. I think a lot of this mentality was ingrained into my parents when they were young. I did not have like very strong women in my family. I just had very angry men. Like my father had immense anger issues because he was abused as a kid, and he also had this perfectionist attitude, which I think I get from him. Having this conversation with my parents was also so hard because for them this is also a very normal thing. Like if I go and tell them like you don't have to be beat yourself up about every small thing. You can forgive yourself and move on. And you might have traumatized me when I was a kid, but it still doesn't make you a bad parent because I know that you were trying your best. A lot of my BPD symptoms, like unstable identity, self harming, splitting, black and white thinking, and cripplingly low self esteem, dependent on other people for your validation. And I think these are the main symptoms that I think has mostly generated from how I trained my brain when I was little.
Trauma isn't like the thing that happens to us, right? Trauma is the way that we experience all of the things around us. It's like the impact it has on us on the inside. And I think you've done a really good job at describing how those experiences have led to symptoms that are then labeled and diagnosed as BPD. Like intergenerational trauma affects your identity, not just in like a material level, right? It's like the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, the family, like it affects you on so many different levels. And that's what makes it so confusing and complicated for me.
I want to say thank you to everybody here because it's not easy. It's not easy talking about. I had to pull out a shirt because I was crying and I don't have tissues, and I was like, damn, I should have had tissues for this episode. Having the courage to say the things that we're saying today, everyone should be very proud of that. And just the work of talking alone is a big deal, and it'll start the process of healing. One of the things that really helped my recovery was I had a fantastic psychiatrist that made it sound so simple, but he said, okay, it seems like culture is one of the most important things to you, and a lot of this trauma stems from there. So what we're going to do is we are going to make lists of all the good things that your culture has given you. Even from trauma, we can grow. Even from trauma, we can gather so many seeds that we can grow later, right? So we started making lists of all those good things that happened, right? Due to this trauma, maybe we migrated, but this led to my ability to know more about my culture and our family, to maybe be anti-assimilation. And I was able to just share all of the things that I learned about my culture and the preservation of my culture. So the preservation was one of the biggest things in therapy that we dealt with, right? If preservation is important for you, how can you do this in an intelligent way where you're not going to get yourself into trouble, where you're not going to go make wars? How can you do this better? And one way for me, and it took a long time. I mean, it took about 7 8 years to get to where I am now. And something as simple as Instagram, something as simple as history reels that I do on my IG have not only made me feel like I'm doing even just the bare minimum, but watching people leave comments or leave messages and say, hey, thank you for teaching me this. I didn't know. You being proud makes me feel like I can be proud, like I don't have to assimilate, right? So these tiny things that we can gather from trauma and just how we can turn it around. How can we make it better? How can we take those wounds and make them into seeds that will later on grow something better?
One of the things that occurs to me is that individual trauma is something that you get to decide really what you do with that. Something like intergenerational trauma isn't just yours, it's your family's, it's your ancestors, it can be your community. How do you manage the fact that the only person's healing you can really directly control is your own?
One of the things that I'm dealing with is, I want to say that for my children, I want to make sure that they have a name that is Nahuatl. Nahuatl is one of our ancient languages. And it's really hard for me to sometimes hear from my own family, who I love, who I know love me, go, oh no, because that's going to be hard for people to say, or how are going to, and it drives me crazy because I'm like, this is our language that they took from us. Why wouldn't I name my child that? Why wouldn't I be proud? Why wouldn't they be proud of their culture? And in those moments, I've learned that I'm not going to change their minds, and that I have to heal my wounds first. And all I can do is lead by example, because before I'd get very angry and I'd attack back. And now we're going on to a 2-hour conversation. I've learned to state my points, but also hear from them. And I constantly ask them questions. Well, what do you think about the fact that this language was our language and it was taken away from us? Something in a better environment. It's a very hard place. I think that it's good that we're getting it done, but also realize that there's only so much you can do. You can help yourself and then just hope that you can lead the way.
In Caribbean, Africa, and a lot of different cultures, men are vilified for the very act of wanting to try to heal, to try to discuss emotions. So the only accountability that I can take is for myself by going first and being seen as a normally strong man, making myself vulnerable. And then what I've done is I've even shared this with people, like, say, I had a conversation with my uncle the other day, and we had a conversation where I then had to show him that his input in my life was one of the reasons that I developed some of these positive coping mechanisms. And then I might talk to someone else's children, because the generational trauma isn't just, I realize, about healing your own family. It's about passing these things down among community. We make it about a universal goal where we're all trying to move forward. Talking, if it's not therapy, but just talking to someone, is the first step. And if you cannot find people that are in your local populace, then that's where the internet and places like the BPD Bunch, that's where we actually are providing a service. It no longer becomes entertainment. Shame was the thing that stopped me from vocalizing a lot of this, because in a lot of our cultures, we are brought up to believe that it brings a huge shame upon your family to discuss matters that involve the family. So even today, as a grown man, I was scared earlier on, because I think, well, will my family now want to talk to me after having seen this show and some of the things that I've said? But again, that all came from the fact that we were told, for a lot of us, you do not discuss family outside of family. So how are you going to therapy if you never discuss your family?
Yeah, to answer your question, Sunny, something that I have learned throughout my healing journey yet is that my healing has to be independent from my family and my culture's healing. It took me a long time, but I think the answer is just acceptance. Like, I needed to accept the fact that I can be there for them, I can support them when the time comes, but I cannot make them go through therapy or like drag them through the process just to make myself feel better. They tried their best and they're still trying their best. And what I, but my healing journey cannot depend on how or when they decide to heal themselves. They had to do it on their own, and I have to do this on my own. And what I can do for my culture and for my community and for the people around me is understand where I'm coming from and keep on healing for myself and for the people I love, because I cannot help them unless and until I am in that place to help them, which is like
That's
in a
right.
much more stable mental space. And I think that is how we can break the cycle.
I love that. So I agree with what you both have said, Madhurima and Andre. I think it's very important to focus and stay in your own lane. Start healing yourself. Because I feel like when you start to heal yourself, it kind of ripples out into your family anyway, you know? My journey has been testimony of that, or testament to that. That like when I started healing, when I started to change, things around me started to change as well. Like, I'm much closer to my family members now, and we relate to each other in very different ways because I went to therapy. And yes, like before therapy, I was very angry. And like, I remember being like even 21 years old and just giving it to my mom, like, I'm the way I am because of you. And rah, like, I just became really angry. Like, and I realized it's not her fault. She did the best that she could with what she was given, all the resources she was given. And like, I can feel that my dad also failed me and stuff, but he also did the best that he could with the resources he was given. And like, it takes compassion as well, big time, you know? I'm learning a lot about that. Like, as I progress through my journey and growing up as a Black woman and the things that I've faced, like, interacting with other people in my community and things, and my mom, my dad, everyone, like, and just realizing, you know what, you guys are going through it yourselves, man. Like, and me having compassion and just being like, okay, you know what, I don't have to like interact with you in that negative way still, but I can pause, I can think about how I'm moving and choose to respond in a different way, right? Because one thing I've learned through this journey is that your first reaction is often not the best reaction. The second one is because you actually thought about that one. So I really go by that. And like teaching people around me, like especially my daughter, like she's mixed heritage, so I have to make sure that she knows exactly where she was from, like, you know, my African heritage and things, that her hair is fine the way it is. She doesn't need to straighten it and do all this nonsense. And she is a queen. She's African, like, you know, just really drumming it home. And yeah, just changing yourself and then it rippling out.
That makes me so happy, Sophie, everything that you were just saying. Something that I think like a lot of people who have just a lot of family trauma go through is a lot of guilt. I'm guilty of the fact that I feel so much pain, that I struggle so much just with life and living when I do have a roof over my head. I'm not living in war. I'm not living through a natural disaster. I don't have a situation of domestic abuse around me right now. I grew up in way better off conditions than my parents or my grandparents or my great-grandparents. And I feel guilt for, you know, they got through it. They got through all of that and I can't even get through just my life. I'm struggling with just my life. The biggest thing that has helped me in my BPD recovery is learning about trauma, is trauma recovery work. Because I've been able to have compassion for myself and for my family forever they're at, right? I've learned how to build boundaries between myself and my family. You know, for a long time, I felt really resented. I didn't feel like they really understood what I was trying to do and who I was and all that kind of thing. And then I kind of, you know, started my healing journey, my recovery journey and becoming who I am. And now that I'm in a more confident place and I've been able to work on my self-esteem and all of that kind of thing, I'm able to go back to my family and, you know, realize that just being myself, like going through my own healing journey is, you know, does have the ripple effects, is impacting my mom. If my grandmother was still around, it'd be impacting her. You know, I can have more conversations with my cousins. I can be more authentic. I am really privileged that I've been able to go through this trauma recovery. And then like just acceptance, right? Acceptance for what I may never know. There's going to be a lot of family dynamics that I'm just never going to hear those stories. I'm never going to know the reason why. A lot of people have passed away. I'm just not going to get that information. And I just need to have acceptance around the stories. I'm not connected with my father. There's a lot there that I'm just never going to know. And I've had to come to acceptance around that. I'm a really strong believer in like the biosocial model of things, right? People behave certain ways for certain reasons. People have had experiences and that impacts your development and your behavior. And I'm not going to blame anybody for their bad behavior or any harm that they've caused. That's their own shit, right? That's their own life. They've gotten to that point because of their own life experiences. And I just trust that there's always a reason why. And that's helped me a lot growing up.
Some of the things that have helped me heal as well was like not listening to that cultural thing. Like within like the Black community, it's struggle on, be quiet, don't tell anyone your business and don't do all of that. So like that's perceived as weak. Why should I block out something that could really contribute towards my healing? How do people heal? How do you heal intergenerational trauma if you're not going to talk about these things? And me and my daughter wouldn't be where we are right now if we didn't have certain interventions, because I opened my mouth and said something and said, look, help me, because I don't have it in me right now. There's this learned helplessness that comes also with intergenerational trauma. You learn to just lie down and take things. No, that's not how it's supposed to go. And, you know, for example, it's affected me on a personal level where I've opened up about my BPD and it brought me towards this show, which is great. I talk about this all the time. So thanks, guys. But also, like, I still feel that level of shame that, like, I'm a Black person and I have BPD and I can't say it out loud because people online are laughing at me or something because I have a white man disease or something like that. It's just very ignorant, like, and I want us to move away from that. And the reason why I started my page in the first place is so that I can help at least one person, especially someone of like color, that will, you know, it can just help them to say, you know what, I see myself in you. You are me. Like, you're healing. You're being honest about it, and you're showing us your transition. You're showing us your healing. What did you do? Did you go to therapy? Okay, I'm having issues. What interventions do I need to put in place for myself? Who do I speak to so that I can start this healing in my own circle and for all of us, you know? And I think my next thing I want to do is like speak to a Black therapist as well. There's not enough of us, I'm not a therapist, but there's not enough like BAME therapists that can really dissect with you. Because I get it, like I had a white therapist and great, she helped me, but she could only help me a certain part of the way, because it's not part of her DNA or fiber to like be able to understand the things that I've been through. So that's definitely something I'll be looking up, to have someone who's aware and trained on things like intergenerational trauma and healing it. But yeah, pressing on and just educating ourselves one by one.
I need that too. My best therapist was a Latina therapist, and I need a professional who understands, like, who isn't going to look at me like I'm fucking crazy when I tell them my crazy family stories.
Yeah, I just want to give a conclusion and say that I love that from this episode, hearing from every single person, what I gather is that a lot of those ripples, to help our community and to help our family as well as while we heal, is compassion. It's making sure that we take action, that we listen, that we're empathetic throughout the whole journey, but that we also have the self-esteem to help ourselves, because it's true, man. Like, we are raised to be resilient, and we're proud to be resilient to a point where it's like, well, that's it. That's all you are. You are just resilience. My mom and I make fun of it all the time because my mom's gone through a huge healing journey too, and she watches every episode. So I love you, Mom. She is amazing. And just like Jess said, there's long ways to go, but she tries every single day. And one thing that we always mention is we weren't allowed to say, like, if I'm going to come home from work after working 8 hours, 9 hours and sit down, there has to be an excuse. Oh, I'm just a little tired. Oh, my knee hurts a little bit. I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes. And we say to each other, my mom and I live together, and we're like, why are we making excuses to sit down? Because we were raised that the only reason you're sitting down or resting, you had to be sick to be able to sit down in my household. My grandma would be like, oh, what are you? Are you sick? No? Okay, then get up, because there's things to do. You don't have to be tired. But if our uncles were sitting down, oh, Papa, what do you need? What do you want? I can bring you food, so there's a lot of gender stuff, right? So me and my mom still make fun of that, because we still tell that to each other now. And we're like, hey, let's just watch Netflix, man. It's okay. So it brings back to that level, like Jess was saying about privilege. Like, we are privileged the way we live now, but that's not a reason we should feel guilty of, right? We need to work forward, and we need to be proud of our resiliency as minorities, as people of color, but that's not all we are. We can't just take it. And like Sophie said, we have to open our mouth. And if people get mad about it, that's it, because I was raised that mental illness was not for us, right? You weren't allowed to, because white people tell you, get over it. It happened years ago, relax. And your own people tell you, no, I mean, I'm fine. Look what I went through, and I'm fine. So you need to get over it. So you can't heal, because both cultures are telling you that you are not allowed to feel the way you are allowed to feel. So what I loved about this entire episode is that everyone talked about very similar upbringings, and we all realized that we have to heal ourselves. We have to lead with compassion, and that the ripples will come. I have cousins that come over now and talk to me about, oh, I saw your reel about this. I want to learn more about this. And you go, okay, well, we're impacting the next generations to be more positive and to also just heal with us together. So I think these ripples will only get stronger and bigger, and we're all doing the best that we can. And that's it, right? Do your best, forget the rest. And you just remind yourself of that every day.
Yes.
I never thought something that would resonate so much within me, because this episode just weirdly resonates too much.
I think this whole conversation reminds me of something that it took me a really long time to understand what it means, but this idea that you don't exist in a vacuum, and the actions of other people will affect you, and your actions affect other people. And I think that's kind of maybe one of the biggest lessons you can learn, like overarching lessons to learn from the concept of intergenerational trauma, that all the things that we do have an effect. And that's why, healing is so important. And it's not just for ourselves, it's for all the people that we come into contact with.
I think we're only just scratching the surface on intergenerational trauma and on our individual stories, right? We haven't even gone into details about things our families have gone through. But like something I like to really picture is like, I don't know, I just think about, I can only go back to like my grandmother's great grandmother's generation. And I literally just like picture like layers of people behind me and layers of people in front of me. Even if I don't have children, I might have children, but you know, at least I'm touching the lives of like my nieces, nephews, children that I might have, children of the future. And I just like picture myself kind of in the middle, all these people behind, all these people forward. And it's like, if I can just make one healthy step forward, like that's enough, right? As long as I'm just like being my best and doing my best and kind of holding up my end of the responsibility of healing and moving that generation forward, we're going to be in a good place, right? So I think everybody here is doing that, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you everyone so much for watching this episode. Hopefully you got a nugget of information that you can take with you on your journey of healing from intergenerational trauma or otherwise. If you like what you see, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a single episode. And we will see you for another brunch next week.
Bye.
Bye.